Hello ratbags, it's Jade with another Nightingale video. We've got another interview, and like I said, I'm going to keep you up to date as soon as we get any more new info about the game. And talking about how Nightingale might not be the big MMO styled game that we might have assumed it could be. In fact, judging by the recent comments in this interview, it sounds like it's going to be a much more co-op focused affair. And given the trailer only shows around 8 or 10 people actually on screen at any one time, I think that could potentially be the limit of how many people are actually going to be playing this game together. We're also going to discuss PvP. We saw from their initial announcement that they were focused on PvE. They said they weren't going to be adding any kind of PvP. However, recent suggestions or takes by other articles seem to suggest there could be room for that in the future. The devs pretty much clear it up in this interview in terms of what potential there is for PvP. But yeah, let's go through. Leave a like, make sure you subscribe for the best in survival games, and any Nightingale info, it will be on my channel first. Let's go. Rebecca Valentine from IGN has got an interview with Aaron Flynn, who I'm also trying to get hold of. I've sent a bunch of emails. I'm hoping to hear back from some of their PR and community team, because I'd love to talk about survival with some people who are making Nightingale. Now, the focus in the actual headline is about it being a BioWare style narrative spine. So the article starts off talking about the world building of Nightingale and how it's going to be either very different, obviously, from their previous games like Aaron's worked on, like the Mass Effect or Dragon Age series. Flynn says there's this notion that a place is something that has human meaning in it, a construct for us mentally and physically that we invest ourselves in. We put ourselves out there to be socially connected to other people. And taking something as high level and almost abstract as that and saying, how can we build places as game developers? What could we do there? So originally it was conceived as an online game where huge number of players could come together in the same space. Flynn says that over time it became apparent that this was not the right path. The team were able to overcome technical challenges with the support of its parent, Improbable. So this is confirmation that it was Improbable that was behind, obviously, Nightingale in the first place, but they've given it off to a satellite studio now, or changed the name purely to get away from that first announcement. That's me reading between the lines. Anyway, let's go back. But an MMO scale game with the goals Inflection had for Nightingale wasn't as enjoyable as it could be. So they scaled it back to a more intimate, cooperative experience to be played with friends. We have some friends on New World team for Amazon, Flynn says, and they very much went the opposite way, right? The story that gets told there, I've at least heard, is that they started off a tight survival inspired game, then they brought in the Amazon technology to make it an MMO, and credit to them, I enjoyed New World a lot. Now that's actually pretty true. I actually got flown out to LA to take a look at New World way back when it was in early development. And while I still technically am under NDA, so I can't talk too much about it, I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to say that there were more survival elements in it. And in fact they wanted my opinion because I've been covering Conan Exiles a lot at that time and Art Survival Evolved, and hence why I was brought in alongside a whole bunch of other MMO actual creators or content makers who did reviews and stuff like that on mostly MMO games. So there was only maybe 4 or 5 of us survival YouTubers that brought in last, because apparently they wanted direct criticism from us. They wanted it to be constructive, but they wanted our opinion rather than maybe streamers and people that are just happy to go and experience a new game. And to me, New World is very much like Conan Exiles, but it's more of an MMO and obviously stripped back massively on the survival elements till the zero. Anyhow, we went the opposite way, Aaron says. We had aspirations to build that huge MMO style game, and then realised that's not what in our team is truly passionate about. Nightingale's been in development for 3 years now, and Flynn says during that time it evolved organically into the survival and crafting genre as a natural result of wanting to make a shared world space that players could impact, while being impacted by the world it takes place in the Fey realms. So we know all this stuff, I'm going to just whiz through it already. There's only a few new bits here in talking about solving puzzles. That's fairly new, that I've not seen mentioned in many other actual interviews. Whether or not that just relates to the actual portals, which we know might be a bit more complex than simply just going up and pressing a button to a portal to a new realm. Flynn acknowledges that Nightingale won't quite have the same narrative spine of a Baldur's Gate or a Mass Effect game, but instead focus much more on other games in the survival genre on world building. He wants players to feel like they are citizens of the world in a universe that already has a story for players to uncover if they so choose. We think we've got a lot of lessons to learn from Mass Effect and Dragon Age and even Anthem. How can we build a world that has survival crafting gameplay in it, but still provide that tremendous umbrella of lore and rich conceits? That makes it just a compelling place to be in that space, Flynn says. They don't want Nightingale to be full of false choices or different choices that ultimately lead to the same conclusion for all players. I think one thing that great RPGs and these survival sandbox games should have in common is the notion of autonomy. The players should feel like they get to do what they want in this world, and we can only offer so much. There are always going to be invisible walls and things like that, but the more we can as developers offer autonomy and real meaningful chances to impact and change the world of the game and see those choices reflected back in compelling ways, the better job we've done. One way that's manifesting, he says, is the size and depth of the world of Nightingale. They won't actually share the physical size for the world just yet, but he says it's pretty big for players to see the choices they're making reflecting properly, both in geographical size and content depth. This is definitely really big news. I've been wondering about the sizes. Originally, I'd gone along with the notion that it could be huge maps to explore, but then when I felt about it, I looked at it, I thought, well, maybe these are only going to be smaller ones. So this realigns that maybe yes, the environments, the biomes we're going to explore aren't going to be just small tiny little stages, but they will be substantial places that you could make home. They also go on to talk about adding post-launch DLC, and they are talking about it in a live service terms, that they've got the technology now and the know-how to offer more compelling DLC, maybe at a quicker rate than what they maybe had with Mass Effect or other games in the past in the BioWare days. So this is where it gets a bit juicy, and it's reconfirming something I saw in another interview. The game website basically listed that you could potentially steal from other players. And this was new to me because all the other interviews had said there wasn't going to be any PvP. But obviously if you can steal from other players, then it kind of leads to the fact that you should be able to claim or get your stuff back from them. Now it's not 100% guaranteed or confirmed just yet. And I've had some pretty heated debates with players talking about the abilities to add PvP. I personally am pretty against it. I feel like there's only a couple of games that really do PvP well in survival. And if you're a proper survival fan that's played more than just one or two, you'll know that I'm talking about pretty much Rust. You could argue that DayZ is maybe a close second, and then we've got games that aren't really strictly full survival like Tarkov that do it really well, but again they're not real full survival games. Other games that have tried it like Atlas, Last Oasis, Art Survival Evolved, some of them games are atrocious. Maybe not because of the conceit or the idea of PvP, but just the way they implement it with lots of cheating, aimbotting and various associated things. Seemingly a lot of them games suffer from that because developers haven't found a way to stop it being manipulated or cheesing through maps or getting through bases. Players will find the weaknesses in every single system. And lots of them games, particularly Ark, have kind of bent to the will of PvP players over time, really taking away abilities from dinosaurs at times and creatures because it was too OP for PvP. Anyway, back to the article. He does say they're open to feedback, potentially adding elements such as PvP or more story focused elements down the line. So Rebecca points out that as they speak it sounds pretty optimistic, from the cooperative and trusting focus of its online play to its colourful magical world. Finn agrees with this and says that there is going to be a survival game, but it's not meant to be one of these games where you're always on edge. You're free to explore, you're free to adventure and build, hence why here confirms that Nightingale won't have PvP at launch, but potentially it could be added in the future. They then talk about the actual loop of getting to Nightingale, the city that's meant to be the end goal, and effectively you will get there. It's not going to be something that's so far off that it will take you forever. If you've played No Man's Sky in the early days, you'll know that once you got there it really wasn't worth it. Now it's a much better game, 100 times better than it was back then, and there's so much to do and see. I'll be surprised if many who have picked up No Man's Sky in the last year have actually completed the game fully. But they want you to get to Nightingale, they want you to explore, to puzzle things out, to get help from other players, and to pretty much get there. They then talk about the studio being a bit more progressive and being a bit more filled with the right kind of diverse hiring, but they're still actually working on that at the moment, and they are really pushing back against things like crunch. They pretty much finish off with him giving a quote from someone he used to work with. I just wish we'd had a marketing campaign that was, here's our game, hope you like it, and that's really what it comes down to. We can put our game out there, we can hear from our players, both the good and the bad, of what they like and don't like about our game. I think we'd all have a chance to improve what they don't like and do what more they do like. But that's the rhythm of it, and just so long as there's a community of players who are digging it and saying, hey, this is really enjoyable, thanks so much for making this, that's all we want. So that is a pretty good article. I think that clears up a few things. It basically says they're never going to rule out PvP, but it's not going to be the focus up to launch. It may not be something they add all the way through early access, but it could be potential there in the future. Now, like I said, I got into it a bit in the comments section on a recent video, and someone was saying they could just add certain PvP servers. My thinking was, once you start doing that, you've got to adjust the balance about gather rates and about how much you can get, what kind of items you can make. They've then got to think about systems to stop aimbotting and players not being able to cheat or shoot or cheese other players with the guns and the firearms or the weapons. That means hitboxes have to be a lot more precise. That means you have to have more in-depth anti-cheat software added to the game as well. And these are the kinds of things that really mean a lot more work if you're going to be adding a PvP segment to it. Even if it does seem pretty simple as just saying, let's create a realm, we'll make that one PvP only. Sure, they could do that, but it would probably be a pretty unbalanced, buggy mess, because the game has been built primarily for a PvE experience that doesn't have them core fundamentals underneath it. With the news as well that this isn't going to be a big massive MMO, you're not going to run into thousands of players on one shard. You may not even have 30, 50, 60, 70 players on one server like Ark or DayZ. It does seem more along the lines of like 10 player co-op like maybe VALHEIM. That game has also had some calls that add some proper PvP, which it does actually have, but then you run into them systems that I'm talking about. If you have PvP, you've then got to have like guilds and options to give people controls about what they can touch in your base and can't touch in your base. Systems to differentiate between friendly and foe. Respawn mechanics, can you respawn at beds? Is it something where you only get one life? That's a whole new way of developing your game. So yeah, I am kind of leaning towards it not being a PvP experience. I like PvP, that's why I've covered it in the past, games like Rust, DayZ, Conan Exiles and stuff. Although I've never really fully committed to that side of things because it's just way too toxic being a YouTuber and trying to do any of that content regularly. I think if you're gonna do PvP, you have to do it all in. Just like Rust is a fully focused PvP game. Yes, you can find servers that you play PvE on, but quite frankly, that is the tiny minority. You're talking about maybe only 1%, 2% of the population of Rust actually play Rust to go and do pretty buildings on a server they own. Likewise in DayZ, there are some servers that offer just survival where you can't kill other players, and it's all just about the infected, fighting off the zombies and just pretty much surviving in Chernarus. But again, it's a really tiny minority. When you look at other games, the most popular being Ark in terms of survival, it's about a 60-40 split. Around 60% play PvE and single player, so you do include them all together obviously, and then about 40% do enjoy maybe PvP or maybe just a bit lower, as of last time I was checking certain stats a couple years ago. And that game frequently has battles between different sets of players wanting different things. And that's the problem. If you do start saying, yeah, we're open to listening, and you do start trying to put stuff in there, it could potentially just mean the game doesn't really have a full focus. We've seen that with New World, the PvP just hasn't been enough to keep players actually doing it for the long term, or the other way round, that the actual rest of the game is so monotonous, so grindy, that the PvP could be fantastic. Actual having battles and wars with other players is great, but to get there, it's just such a long slog that you're just really not that interested. So an unusual one for sure. I'd love to pick their brains and talk more about this. Yeah, great interview. Big shout out to Rebecca Valentine. I'm going to do that more, try and tag in the actual authors of these articles, because sometimes in the past I probably have just referenced the actual website. But likewise, I get grumpy when websites have used my guides and tutorials in the past and haven't given me a proper shout out. So yeah, some cool answers there. There is little bits of story. They want the actual focus to be on your consequences happening because of maybe you've overbuilt somewhere, or maybe it changes the landscape of that world if you're not protecting it enough from the sort of bound. And then obviously that PvP question does seem a bit much more clearer now. I'm very excited about obviously Nightingales. I recently made it my #1 hyped game of 2022, replacing the day before, Towers, Small Lands and even Sons of the Forest as the game I really want to play the most and take a look at deeper in 2022. So go and check it out if you want to see more of what I expect for survival in the next year. And I'll be back. Any more Nightingale news, as I said, I'm going to be all over it, regular clockwork. I've reported on a bunch of stuff over the last few months. I can't wait to actually get news about maybe testing it out in the future. Until next time, Ratbags, laters.